Okay, so I want to give you a kind of an introduction into, I think, a very interesting ethical theory, a sort of introduction into Aristotle's ethics, which is a very broad text. But I want to basically talk about his idea. What's his recipe? What's the recipe for happiness? And what we're talking about with Aristotle, and what we're talking about next time we speak as well, are these ancient ethical doctrines. They're different from what we've covered so far. Okay, we spoke about utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, sentimentalism. We spoke a little bit about Hobbes and so on. What we're talking about with Aristotle and these ancient philosophers is a doctrine of character. Okay, they're more interested in what kind of a person should you be, rather than the question of what should you do in a given situation. Okay, remember, when we're looking at it from, let's say, Kant or utilitarian perspective, the idea is sort of what is the right thing to do in this situation, as though the action is sort of kind of divorced from the person who's actually doing the action. What the ancients are going to say is your actions stem from something which is more deeply rooted, which is who you are, which is your character. Okay, you are more your habits than an agent, a free moral agent that is able to act sort of in an uncaused vacuum, if that makes sense. Okay, you are always acting in accordance with your character traits, your dispositions, your habits. Okay, that's what we talk about. Let's say the force of habit. You can't really act contrary to your nature. So the ancient philosophers, when they talk about ethics, ethics is not the study of right and wrong in the way that we've been talking about it with utilitarianism and Kant. When they talk about ethics, it is the study of character. What sorts of character traits should we hope to develop? What kind of character traits are going to be beneficial to ourselves and to others and to the broader community and so on? Okay, so this is what is called sort of the primacy of character. To understand what goodness is you have to understand the source of goodness, which stems inside the person, the character traits. All right. So just keep that in mind. This is something that I want you to retain. Is what is virtue? This is something that I want you to have a grasp of the definition of virtue and potentially some examples. Virtue is basically the content of your character. The noble character traits that you possess, which enable you to live life fully and which enables you to be productive, not only for yourself, but for also the people around you. So let's kind of briefly define it. A virtue is an admirable character trait or disposition to habitually act in a manner that benefits ourselves and others. All right. So it's something that is sort of, it's not tangible. It's a property that you have. It's a characteristic that you have. It's an attribute that you have. So again, if I ask you to think about somebody who you admire, whether it be a role model, something, what should come to mind is, I ask you, well, why do you admire them? If you say, oh, I admire them because they're rich, or I admire them because they're beautiful, or I admire them because they have a lot of followers on Facebook, you're somehow missing the point. Okay. You're admiring them for sort of the wrong reasons. You're admiring them for external circumstances. Hopefully, when I ask the question, think about somebody who you admire and why you admire them. Hopefully, what comes to your mind is somebody who you admire because they have certain traits, they have certain characteristics. Okay. Then I ask, well, why do you admire them? Say, I admire them because they're generous, because they're compassionate, because they're trustworthy, because they have a sense of humor, because they're kind, because they exhibit patience. So things like, like when let's say if I were to think about my father, what are some sort of traits that makes my father shine as a human being? Is my father is has a ridiculous amount of patience. Okay, he almost has patience of the level of saintliness. He has a lot of other virtues that are beneficial for him and that also sort of communicate themselves and make the people's lives who are around him also better. He has other positive traits. He's not perfect, but definitely virtue is something that would stand out. All right. So that's what we're thinking about. Ethics from this perspective is not about right or wrong as some abstraction. Ethics is concretely, what kind of person should I want to become? All right. So that's a very important question. It's not like, oh, it's a kind of a trivial, interesting, intellectual, philosophical, and academic question. It seems to be a pretty good question to consider on a habitual basis. What kind of traits do I possess that I would like to augment? What kind of traits do I possess that I would like to, slowly get rid of? And what kind of traits would I like to acquire? It seems like a pretty good exercise to do. No, it seems like, it should sell itself in a way. Now, just a few more points here about virtue is what you get with the ancients is, again, your virtue, if you truly understand what virtue is, you go back to this idea that it's done for its own sake, which is sort of a reoccurring theme, okay? That when something is truly moral, it is done for its own sake. Here we get that understood as virtue. When something is truly virtuous, you understand that, yes, this virtue, this trait that you have, your generosity or your honesty, your integrity, your loyalty, your compassion, your patience, these are things that can be beneficial, practically beneficial in the world, okay? They can help you get ahead in the world. But there's also somebody who truly understands virtue, is that they understand that this is something that I enjoy possessing for itself. It makes my life better, okay? Now, what else? So keep that in mind. Virtue is something that is sought after. If you truly understand what virtue is, it's something that you truly desire for itself. And in the same way that you can talk about, let's say, a car, you can say this car has good virtues, or a particular dish, has good virtues. It has qualities that make it excel at what it does. You can talk about human virtues. You can also talk about human vices, which are basically the opposite. What are character traits that undermine your quality of life and undermine the people around you? Okay, such as dishonesty, lack of loyalty, and all this stuff. But there are things. Now, this is also interesting. There are things that we would call virtues that you wouldn't necessarily even equate with the sort of religious sense of right and wrong. In other words, things are virtues and vices which are not, let's say, a sin in a sort of religious sense. In other words, being debilitated by shyness is not a sin in the religious sense, but it is a kind of a lack of a virtue. You know what I mean? You have a character trait which is a kind of a stick in the wheels. It prevents you from living this life fully. All right. So keep that in mind as well. And keep this other thing. So I definitely want you to retain the definition of what is a virtue. And I want you to retain this other idea that Aristotle says, that a virtue can always be understood as a balance between two extremes. That's a kind of, I'm not sure if that always works, you know what I mean? But it seems to be a kind of a practical heuristic. It seems to be a kind of a practical shortcut. That if you want to know what the right thing is to do in any given situation, that's not the right way to say it. What kind of person should you be is look at the extremes on both sides. And if you take a middle position, it seems to be that you might not be far off from what you should be aspiring towards. I'm not sure if that's always right. Maybe that's too simplistic to say that. But there are some elements where you see that there's a good example that that's true. For instance, patience, if you're a little bit too patient, then you miss the boat. At one point, you have to be proactive. Okay, but on the flip side, you have people that are a little bit, they're I don't know what would be the opposite of patience. It would be sort of
impatient.
Impatient, but also sort of rushing things along. And you can also, let's say, you can ruin job opportunities by rushing into things. You can ruin good projects by trying to rush the end result and so on. So you see that the patience is a balance between the two extremes. Take courage. If you're a soldier and you're too courageous and you're rash, you just kind of recklessly charge into battle, you're going to die right away and you're kind of a useless soldier. It's not very beneficial to yourself, and it's not really beneficial to your battalion. But simultaneously, on the flip side of that is, if you lack courage, then you're also a useless soldier. You're a coward. Okay. So having too much of something is bad, and having not enough of it is also bad. Virtue is always a kind of in between two extremes, two vices. Okay. Keep that in mind. I'm going to try to give you this. I'm going to be skipping quite a few slides here because I want to try to keep this short and sweet. Let me see now. Somebody said something in the chat which isn't popping up. So if you have something to say, just maybe speak up. Otherwise, it's probably going to pop up as I'm speaking. Let me proceed. And hopefully that whatever was said in the chat pops up. So he says this is a very simple idea, a kind of a starting assumption. Starting assumption is everything in nature, everything that nature does is for a specific purpose. Nature does nothing in vain. And furthermore, everything that is done with a specific intention or a goal in mind, okay? Nothing is done just randomly. We do things for the sake of something else, okay? So he's interested in sort of two questions there, and they're all going to combine. It's a kind of there's some complexity to this philosophy, okay? One question is, what therefore is the end goal that all of our action and all of our energy is directed towards? What are we trying to ultimately achieve? It's a very interesting question. What is the end goal? What is the purpose of all of our action, all of our activity? That's question number one. And question number two is in relation to the other assumption, which is everything in nature has a function. Nature does nothing in vain. Then the question is, well, then what is our function insofar as we are human beings? What is our essence? What is uniquely our purpose that belongs uniquely to us, that is not shared by anything else in nature? What makes us what we are, and therefore what makes us consequently unique? Okay. So let me just let me sort of unpack this. He's going to say there is that which we call the end in itself. Okay, the summum bonum, the ultimate good, that which is truly the end goal of everything that we're trying to do. Anybody want to take a stab at what that is? What is really the thing that we're all really striving for? It should be pretty obvious. We'll get to it if nobody wants to speak up. So acceptance, he's going to say, he would put that in terms of, let's say, status and reputation, and he would say that's part of it, but it's not the actual thing. Okay. Anybody else want to take another stab?
Happy, content.
Happy, content. That's what it is. Okay. We all want happiness. Okay. That is what he calls the end goal. Everything that we do, if we truly were to analyze why we do it, like a child asks, well, why? Well, why? Well, why? At one point, you would say, well, because it makes us happy. Okay. And presumably that would be a kind of a conclusive answer. That it would be sort of strange to say, well, why do you want to be happy? Okay. So we want happiness. And he's going to say, well, we need to define that. So we'll get to that in just a second. So happiness is that which we want for itself. In other words, you get happiness, and you don't get happiness for the intention of exchanging it for something else. Happiness is sufficient in and of itself. Then he's going to say that there are these kind of intermediate goods, or these intermediate ends. There are things that are good in and of themselves, but also good because they help bring us closer to another higher end, ultimately leading up to happiness. So what would something like that be? Let's say education. Education is a sort of intermediate it's instrumental. It's an instrumental good, but it's also a good in and of itself. Okay, it's kind of a halfway one, which is how let me try to explain. Education. Education is, if you truly understand what education is, you realize that there's value in education for itself. Okay, but you also realize very pragmatically and practically, I want to get an education because it's going to help me potentially get a job and so on. Okay, help me get a higher salary. So it's something that we want as a means, and also something that we want as an end. Same thing with health. Okay, health is something that we want as an end in itself. But if you just want to be healthy for the sake of being healthy, that's also sort of missing the point. You want to be healthy so that you can utilize your health. So health is, let's say, a means and an end. There are many things like that. Okay. And he's going to say there are some things that are simply just instrumental goods. Okay. So let's say the point of the carpenter is not just to buy the hammer. It's like, okay, now I bought the hammer and I'm satisfied. No, you want the hammer as an instrument to do the work that you want to do. So some things are just like that. They have no intrinsic value. They have value only insofar as they are exchanged for something else. And he's going to say something like money is like that. Money does not have real value. It only has value when you exchange it for something that does. Okay. If the end goal of life is just to make money, then you end up sort of like Citizen Kane. You have a lot of money, and then just before you die, you realize, holy shit, I wasted my life. Okay. I forfeited a lot of things that were potentially meaningful because I was pursuing this thing which has no intrinsic value that when I die, I can't take with me. Okay. So we all want happiness. Now he's going to say, we all agree that we want happiness, but now there's two questions. First of all, how do we define it? And how do we best obtain it? Okay. And we get our wires crossed. He says, that's where, he says, people know that they want happiness, but people don't end up getting happiness because they're either confused as to how to best obtain happiness or how to even define happiness. So let's kind of unpack that. He's going to say there are basically three things that we typically confuse for happiness. And let me give you how he's going to define happiness. Let me just give it to you right off the bat. For him, happiness is a Greek word, which is eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is usually translated as kind of almost a contentment, a satisfaction, or a fulfillment. Fulfillment is a better word. You are happy for Aristotle when you are fulfilled. Okay. Now, how are we supposed to understand that fulfillment? Let me just give you the answer, and we're going to unpack it. For Aristotle, it's a fulfillment of one's function. It's a fulfillment of one's potential. Okay. In other words, you can sort of dwindle along, or you can thrive. Okay. Or like you can be immensely wealthy, or you can have a job that's very, very, very well paying, but you don't feel as though you're thriving. You don't feel as though you are actualizing potential. That's a very good way to put it for Aristotle. You are fulfilling yourself, means you are actualizing what you are capable of doing. You're actualizing your potential.
Can I actually add something?
Go ahead.
So in our psychology class, my project for my group was self-determination theory. And it was saying a lot how when we set goals and achieve them, we get a sense of fulfillment. So happiness pretty much, and it actually boosts our motivation because we see what we could do and we feel good and we keep doing it.
Yeah, good.
It's
so
like
that's
when
that
we
would
get discouraged that we don't, like we stop.
Yeah, so good. That's good. That's quite good. Okay, fulfilling these. So that's a good way to put it. That's the next thing I was going to say is Aristotle would say true happiness is fulfilling meaningful goals to the best of your ability. Okay, doing meaningful work. There's an activity. Okay, with Aristotle's definition of happiness, happiness is the result of meaningful work done to the best of your ability, done well. Make the best you can with what you're given. All right. So let's kind of unpack that. So he says, where do we get confused? We get confused in that there's a verbal agreement that we all agree that we want happiness, but there's substantive disagreement on the nature of happiness or how it is best attained. So he says, let me just kind of read it here. Okay, he says, we want money. But again, we all know people that have money and are not happy. And we know people that potentially don't have a lot of money and they're happy. So what's going on there? That is to say, money is not in and of itself, money in and of itself does not secure happiness, okay? A lot of people sort of get their wires crossed and they say, first I'm gonna work and I'm gonna make money, and then I'll be able to buy my happiness, okay? And they end up realizing that maybe they forfeit a lot of things along the way because maybe they misestimated, okay? Now, Aristotle's not going to say money is a bad thing. He says the exact opposite. He says money is good. Money is part of the recipe that's going to help you make the cake. Okay. In other words, but it's not in and of itself sufficient for making the cake. In other words, if you're going to make the cake, you need, eggs and water and flour and sugar. Money is just, let's say, the sugar. It's an important element, but you can't make a cake with just sugar in the same way that you can't make happiness with just money. All right. And same thing with status. And same thing with status and power. I guess we can put the reputation, acceptance. Okay, we all want to fit in. And lastly is pleasure. Okay, this idea that's what we're going to talk about with Epicurus. But Aristotle says there's more to life than just sort of satisfaction of pleasures. We have a drive. Okay, there is a drive. We want to seek to fulfill potential. Okay, let me try to give you an example. 2 examples of this. I have some friends who have well-paying jobs, but they're miserable. They hate their job. Okay, and they're actually miserable at the end of the day. I have friends that have well-paying jobs and they're well-respected. They have status and recognition and acceptance and reputation in that job. But really, at the end of the day, when they have to look at themselves in the mirror, again, there's not that deep fulfillment. Okay, that in some sense you would be almost better off doing something that you regard as truly meaningful. What is lacking is a sense of kind of meaning there. They make money and they're respected, but they know that, look, what I do doesn't matter. Whether I do this job or somebody else does it or whether nobody does it, doesn't really change anything. Okay, they're bigger fish to fry. So there's a sense of, is the goal that you're achieving truly meaningful in your own assessment? And furthermore, what was the other one? I don't want to miss it. Are you intellectually engaged in it? Do you feel creative? Do you feel involved? Do you feel you can do a very monotonous, some people have that job, you might call it a lucky job, that they have a very monotonous, simple job that is very well paying and they're very, they're respected for it, but still I'm not engaged with it. I'm not intellectually engaged. So for Aristotle, let me just give you the point there, is he's going to say specifically, human fulfillment requires the employment of the intellect as well. If you really want to be fulfilled, you want to feel as though you're firing on all cylinders, you have to be involved in activities that you regard as meaningful, but also are cognitively and creatively, intellectually, rationally engaging and stimulating. Okay. Let me just say this. This is not something that I would normally add here, but it's on my mind right now. So some of you may have you've seen this, okay? And I probably should have had an image of it, but I guess it came to my mind now. Is how do you define success? Okay. And some people say, oh, success is I just got to get paid. Okay, I want to make money. And some of you have seen this Venn diagram, and there's about 4 or 5 circles around it. And the idea is that success is in the middle. That to be successful, you have to have all of these circles addressed. Okay, so let me see if the ones that I remember is you have to do something that you're good at. Okay, but that's part of it, your passion. Okay, a lot of people put a lot of emphasis, oh, you have to do something that you're passionate about. Yeah, but a lot of people are passionate about music, but they know that they're not going to get paid, and they know they're not going to get an audience, regrettably. However, they might be great musicians, but whatever the circumstances are, the industry and the market, they can't break through, and they're passionate as hell, but they don't feel successful. Okay, which is in that case regrettable. So you have to be passionate. What am I good at? That's also part of what Aristotle is saying. What is your capacity? What can you offer? What are your virtues? Okay, what am I good at? That's one circle. The second thing is, that's the second one. What am I good at? What do I care about? What am I passionate about? And what am I good at are actually 2 different circles, because you can be passionate about something without being good at it, and vice versa. You can be good at something without being passionate about it. Okay, so if you're good at something and you're passionate, you can be, let's say, like a skilled, a skilled artisan or something like that. You might not still, so you have to be something that you care about, passionate about, something that you're good at, and then something that is actually meaningful, something that you can contribute to society, something that you feel is meaningful and contributing, and also somebody's going to pay you for. Okay, because if you do all the first things, then it's kind of like volunteer work, and it can be very good and very meaningful, but at one point you have to get paid. Okay, so I care about it, I'm good at it, it's meaningful in a kind of a broader societal sense, I feel like I'm contributing, and I also get paid. Okay, there might be other elements there, but those start to converge towards, if you have all of those, then you're lucky. A lot of people are not able to sort of figure out how they're going to equate all those things. So okay, let me proceed here. Fulfillment of kind of a function. and even pleasure, you know what I mean? A lot of people pursue pleasure, and they don't have that sort of long, that lasting fulfillment. But you have to understand that with Aristotle is happiness is not something, therefore, that is static. It's not something like, okay, I get it and I bank it and it's finished. I have it in my pocket. Happiness is a kind of a perpetual byproduct of a sort of form of living. It's an active living where you are doing meaningful work to the best of your ability. Happiness comes from work. Okay, that's interesting. So here we go. That's another point I want to make, is that everything that has a function in nature seeks the fulfillment of that function. Okay, let me try to explain that with some different examples. Let me start off with a kind of a non-living example. Suppose you have a car. Okay, you can have a Ferrari, you know, a beautiful engine inside, you know, like a V8 engine, beautiful. But the Ferrari is just sitting there, you know, in a collector's garage. That there's something about the Ferrari that if the Ferrari were to have a soul, every once in a while it wants to go out and just express its beauty, its potential. Okay, it wants to get fired up. You want to fight. You want to, you know, and you don't want to be driven around the block all slowly. The Ferrari, and if you're in the Ferrari driving it, maybe the Ferrari drives that out of you as well. The Ferrari sort of calls upon you. It's speaking to you to kind of push it. You know what I mean? Really explore its potential. Give like an eye. He says an eye wants to see. Everything that has a function seeks to has a disposition to find a situation where its function can be fulfilled. Okay, let me give you two more examples. If you grow tomatoes, you know, sometimes in the summer I'm growing tomatoes. If I have tomatoes in the front yard where there's more sunshine, even if it's the same tomato variety, even if it's a clone of the same plant, the plant that is going to be in the front yard is in an environment where it can really truly express its potential. It's thriving. Thriving is a very good word for this philosophy. Okay, fulfillment of potential. So the plant in the front yard is thriving. The plant in the backyard, which does not get as the same amount of sunlight, is kind of, it's alive, but it's not optimal. Okay, there's a joy in excelling, in being your version of optimal, not somebody else's version of optimal, not societally prescribed version of optimal. Figure out what you're good at and do it. Okay, basically. Now, let me give you one more example. I've had the fortune of seeing lions in a large game reserve in South Africa. Okay, and like hundreds, if not thousands, of square kilometers, and you see the lion basically in as pristine a habitat as you can get. Okay, they're doing their own hunting, they're doing their own living, and I've seen a lion at Granby Zoo, and I can say that they're not the same thing. Okay, so Aristotle would say that what truly matters, what truly defines something, it's the fulfillment of its function is what matters rather than the form. What Aristotle might say is the lion that you see at Granby Zoo that is basically seems to be depressed and sedated and lethargic, you're actually looking at kind of less than half of a lion. You call it a lion, you identify the form of the lion, but what you're not seeing is the life of the lion, which is exhibited in its functioning, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can almost build a case, a kind of a moral argument around human integrity, around Aristotle's philosophy. If you want to talk about, let's say we mentioned during the presentation, we mentioned sweatshop labor. Okay, there's something alienating about that. Human beings did not evolve naturally to do a monotonous task 12 to 14 hours a day. Okay, so you can almost use that and say, no, ignorance is not bliss. There's something about the organism that is telling you this is not good. Okay, but sometimes you're nonetheless sort of trapped in that. Okay, and you can also sort of make a case, I guess, for animal rights as well. That you say, look at this lion, you know, is this ethical that we should have for our very petty human? It's bad entertainment because the lion doesn't even look alive to me. Why do I have to pay $40 to come to a zoo? Why should I be supporting this kind of industry? I'm looking at a half-dead lion. Okay, what's the joy of this? Okay, the joy, and he's going to talk about that. There's also joy in perceiving the expression of excellence. So even if you are not doing something excellently, but you're listening to a musician play excellently, he would say the guitar of the musician, insofar as it has a soul, if you were to personify the guitar, the soul of the guitar is happy. The musician is happy because they are both mutually fulfilling their mutual potentials together as a kind of a synergy. And you, as a spectator of this, also partake in a kind of a joy in the spectatorship of excellence. You also get happy as a result of that. You derive some happiness from that. Okay, that's very interesting. So think about the lion, or you take, let's say, a wolf, who that is designed by nature to cover tens of hundreds of kilometers per day, or a coyote, and you put it in a cage because you're going to use it for its fur. You are depriving that being of its potential to express its essence. You are, in some sense, undermining its vitality. You are undermining its raison d'être, its purpose for living. Okay, so it's very interesting. So he says, what is our human nature? He says we have a plant nature insofar as we seek nutrition and growth and reproduction. So insofar as you are happy, you have to satisfy your plant nature, but you also have an animal nature in that you seek sentience and locomotion and perception. That's why if you take somebody and you throw them into solitary confinement, where they can no longer, engage with their senses, they start to go a little bit crazy. They start to be driven to madness, because all of this potential seeks its kind of exercise, its utilization. But he says, above all this, and what distinguishes us from other animals, is we also have the capacity to reason, which, if you are living fully, you are engaged in tasks and activities that are meaningful, wherein you are rationally, creatively, intellectually, meaningfully engaged. Okay, that's interesting. Happiness comes from fulfilling your potential. Part of what your potential is as a human being is being a rational being. So even, let's say, at Google and large tech companies, they realized if you want to optimize productivity of an employee, doubling their salary is not going to double their productivity. But once you give somebody liberty and creativity and a capacity to engage in intellectually freely chosen projects, people are stimulated again. You know what I mean? There are, let's say, workspaces that are more conducive to that, and workspaces that are less conducive to that. So very interesting. I think that he's onto something here. Let's get to the point here. So let me get to this point here. Hold on. I'm going fast here. So there's kind of three levels of it, and it's the same philosophy at all three levels. The level of the individual organism, the level of the individual self in your immediate social circle, and the level of the community or the society. It's the same philosophy. So insofar as you are a living organism, you can only, in some sense, be fully happy insofar as you have, your vitality is not disrupted by some kind of disease or some illness. It's very difficult to be happy if you are sick. Okay, you're like, when I had gastro last week, I wasn't too happy. Okay, oh God, what's the point of all this? Please let it end soon. And that's just a kind of a small thing. It's very difficult to retain a sense of a deep contentment if you're sick. All right. And now, let me give this other example. Suppose, we talked about the Tiger Woods there with the accident. If you have, let's say, a soldier and a ballerina sustain the same bodily injury, let's say they both get a broken leg, their injury, even though it's physiologically the same, the pain is perceived differently, and partly because of the psychology of how they interpret the injury in relation to their function. The soldier with a broken leg perceives the pain differently because the pain, first of all, informs the soldier that I'm still alive, and secondly, I get to go home. Okay. Whereas the ballerina, the same injury signifies my career is over, and therefore the pain is felt much more acutely as a result. It's very interesting. Okay. In relation, so insofar as you are a ballerina, you're going to be miserable as long as you have a broken leg, a career-ending broken leg, until you recalibrate your sense of what your function is in this world, and then you can start to be happy again, but under a different umbrella, under a different function. Okay, so insofar as, let's say, so that's kind of you as an organism, you in your immediate entourage, I'm happy insofar as, if I feel like I'm doing a good job teaching, I'm happy insofar as I'm a teacher. But then I have different roles to play. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a friend. So insofar as I'm living fully, fulfilling my potential, I have to be addressing all of these roles. I have to be firing on all cylinders. So that let me kind of say something, a little bit thing that came in my mind. It's almost like, well, that sounds exhausting. Well, no, it's almost the opposite. Is when you are engaged and you're active, you feel energized. It's like, maybe you can relate to this, but there's some days where I get a lot done. And at the end of the day, I feel good. I feel alive. I feel good. I feel energized. And there are days when, I just slob around the house all day. And at the end of the day, I don't feel too good. I don't feel too good physically, and I don't feel too good about myself. So it's kind of almost counterintuitive. Okay. And now the same thing applies at the societal level. He says the optimal society would be one in which everybody, given their virtues and their characteristics and their traits and their skills and their dispositions, finds the niche where they're good and they're useful. So the people that have patience are going to become, I don't know, teachers. The people that are courageous are going to become firefighters and soldiers. The people that have integrity should become politicians. The people that have good manual skills should go and become cooks, and then not only would they excel and they would be happy, but we would also all excel, simultaneously, because we would all reap the rewards of everybody's all of these different systems, all of these different goods that are goods in of themselves, but all which are also directed towards this higher happiness. Okay, so there's also kind of a sense of justice in there. If you have a good guitar, if you have a beautiful guitar, you shouldn't give it to, let's say, the man who can pay the highest bid for it, who's just going to put it on a wall and look at it. You should give the excellent guitar to the best musician, even if he can't afford it, because therein will be the object is not what matters. It is what comes from the object. Okay, and it is best used, it is best utilized in the hands of this individual, even though he can't afford it. So there's a case to be made in terms of justice that is where it should be allocated. So there's kind of a societal sense of goodness and this kind of utopian vision that we already kind of criticized a little bit with Hobbes. Okay, let me see what else I have to say here. Just one more thing. This idea that your habits are not something that you're born with. You're not born necessarily being excellent or particularly skilled at something. You may have some, inherent dispositions, but you are your habits. Okay, you are your habits. Therefore, you should seek to cultivate good habits, and you should seek to slowly eradicate bad habits. So you can live excellently. Excellence is an art won through training and habituation. We are what we do repeatedly. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Okay. Let me see what else I want to say. I was going to talk about a little bit about Dante. Let me just mention it very quickly and conclude here. Is in Dante's ranking of sinners in the Inferno, you would think that, well, what's the worst thing that you can do? The worst thing you can do is steal or kill. You think the murderers are at the lowest level of hell. But what this individual says in this academic article is he says Dante was following Aristotle's line of thinking and his ethics. And so the point is, the really bad people in hell are the people that did not commit crimes of passion, like murdering somebody out of a fit of rage. The people who are really at the lowest ranks of hell are the people that had a rationality, but misused their rationality for evil. Because your rationality is something that is telling you, it reveals to you, what you're doing is wrong. So in other words, the alarm bell was ringing, but you push, silence, silence, silence. You are hijacking the intellect of man, which for Aristotle is already directed towards the goodness. Okay. So people that are, let's say, traitors or fraudsters or people that violated the trust of other people, those are the people that are at the lowest levels of hell for Dante. And just keep that in mind. For Aristotle and for a lot of these ancient philosophers, to be a virtuous person Again, you're not doing it because I want to go to heaven and because I want, to be praised societally. I'm a virtuous person because it is beautiful. It is beautiful to be a virtuous person. Okay, it's beautiful. I recognize that beauty for myself, and I recognize it in other people. So therefore, it's something that is seen. Virtue is seen as an ends in itself. Okay, so that's it. I wanted to keep that short and sweet. Any questions or comments? Any reactions to this? Criticisms? What's going on? Is this the chat? Okay, what's this? Okay, you found the Venn diagram that I was mentioning. Okay, hopefully I got all the circles. Does anybody else want to comment on this before we adjourn here? Any questions, comments, reactions to this? So we're talking about happiness. It's a very interesting idea of happiness. Happiness comes from fulfillment of one's tasks. So he says the shoe cobbler is happy who makes the best shoes that he can with the materials that he's given. Okay, so I think he's onto something there. And so keep also in mind that idea of virtue. How do we define virtue? Any other questions or comments? Any reactions to this? Make sense? Okay.
It makes sense when you were saying like you're a dad, like you're a son, like all that stuff. Like it's important, I think, to be happy like in everything, not just like one thing.
Yeah, so it's like if you're, if I'm a good dad, but I'm a bad husband, it's like a car with a flat tire. You know what I mean? The car might be rolling along, but there's a stick in the wheel somewhere. Okay, so you got to figure out where those sticks are. You got to get rid of the sticks in the wheels. You got to let the wheel, roll smoothly. Okay, good. Any other questions, comments, reactions to that? So, okay, test is going to be next week, as I said, on Wednesday. I'll send it to you. You guys have until Friday evening. That's about it. That's all I have to say. I will try to send you that documentary. That's just a little bonus material on the psychology of evil. And that's it. The responses will be due the following Wednesday. That's it, guys. That's all I have to say. Okay, let's finish there. Thank you very much, guys. Have a nice break, and we'll talk again in 2 weeks. Thank you. See you guys. Stick around if you have any questions.